The biting New York wind whipped around Liam as he pulled his scarf tighter, the city a symphony of hurried footsteps and distant sirens. It was Christmas Eve, a time for forced cheer and overpriced lattes. For Liam, a freelance graphic designer whose life was a meticulously curated digital landscape, the holidays were an annual exercise in controlled chaos. He met Maya, Chloe, and Mark outside Wonderland Toys, a relic of a bygone era, its ornate facade a stark contrast to the sleek glass towers surrounding it. Maya, a budding photographer with an almost childlike wonder, shivered, but her eyes sparkled at the festive window displays. Chloe, an archivist by profession, adjusted her glasses, her expression a mix of academic curiosity and mild disdain for the commercialism. And Mark, a boisterous, perpetually skeptical bartender, was already complaining about the cold, his breath pluming in the frigid air. This annual ironic pilgrimage to the city's oldest toy store was Liam's idea, a sardonic nod to their fading youth. The air inside was thick with a cloying scent of plastic, stale gingerbread, and something else, something metallic and faintly sweet, that Liam couldn't quite place. The saccharine jingle of jingle bells assaulted their ears, a relentless, cheerful torture. It was amidst this sensory overload, tucked away behind a towering display of antique rocking horses, that Liam spotted it. A narrow, unlit corridor, almost swallowed by shadow where no corridor should have been. Anyone ever seen this before? Liam's voice was barely a whisper above the din. The corridor was an anomaly, a dark seam in the fabric of the brightly lit store. Its entrance was framed by peeling, festive wallpaper, faded reds and greens clashing with the modern displays. A faint, sickly green light pulsed from within, accompanied by a sound like distant, broken music box, a melody struggling to be heard. Mark scoffed, ever the pragmatist. Probably a staff entrance or a fire hazard. Don't touch anything, Liam, you'll get us kicked out. But Maya, her photographer's eye drawn to the unusual, felt an undeniable pull. It's not on the map. I checked last year when I was doing that historical architecture project. Chloe, usually reserved, stepped closer, her brow furrowed in thought. The store's blueprints don't show anything like this. It's an impossible space. Curiosity, that most dangerous of human traits, won out. We stepped inside, the festive jingle of the main store abruptly cut off, replaced by an unsettling silence, punctuated only by the soft scuttling of something unseen, like tiny claws on dusty wood. The air immediately grew heavy, cold despite the store's warmth, carrying that sweet metallic smell, now more pronounced, like old blood mixed with candy canes. The walls were lined with shelves stretching into an impossible distance, filled with toys that looked ancient, forgotten, their painted eyes seeming to follow our every move. The shadows were the first undeniable sign that this was no ordinary corridor. They weren't just shadows cast by the dim, flickering lights that struggled to illuminate the impossible length of the passage. They moved. They writhed. Long, slender tendrils of darkness detached from the walls, slithering across the floor, always just at the edge of our peripheral vision. They seemed to observe us, to herd us deeper into the corridor, their movements silent but purposeful. The air grew dense, making it hard to breathe, and the distant, broken music box melody intensified, now accompanied by faint, childish giggles that seemed to echo from nowhere and everywhere at once. Then, a voice not spoken aloud but felt deep within our minds, a primal, undeniable command that resonated in our bones. You cannot leave empty-handed. We looked at each other, faces pale, fear blooming in our chests. Mark, ever the defiant one, his face a mask of forced bravado, grabbed a dusty one-eyed teddy bear from a shelf. Its fur was matted, its single-button eye staring blankly. "Fine, I'll play your stupid game," he muttered, but his voice cracked. Liam picked a tarnished tin soldier, its uniform faded, its tiny sword bent. Maya, drawn to its tragic beauty, chose a porcelain doll with cracked lips and a missing eye. Chloe, after a moment of hesitation, selected a small wooden jack in the box, its paint chipped, its crank stiff. As we turned to leave, a cracked antique mirror at the corridor's end shimmered, and a message appeared, etched in frost, its letters glowing with that sickly green light, 25 days. Pass it on. Or become the gift. We stumbled out of the corridor, blinking as if waking from a nightmare, back into the bright, noisy toy store. The corridor was gone, replaced by a solid wall of Barbie dolls, their plastic smiles mocking our terror. The saccharine jingle of jingle bells assaulted our ears once more, but now it sounded sinister, a soundtrack to our dread. Mark, still fuming, held up his teddy bear, its single button eye seeming to bore into him. This is ridiculous. Some old prank. A stupid, dusty toy. His voice was too loud, too forced. He took out his pocket knife, a relic from his Boy Scout days, and with a sneer he plunged it into the teddy bear's chest, tearing the matted fabric. A faint, almost imperceptible whimper escaped the bear, a sound that made the hairs on Liam's arms stand on end, and a puff of dark, acrid dust rose from the wound, smelling faintly of decay and old cotton. Mark laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. See? Nothing. Just a stupid, dusty toy. But then his laughter died. His hand, where he'd held the knife, began to tingle, a burning sensation spreading rapidly. A dark, thin line, like a vein of ink, appeared under his skin, snaking up his arm, pulsing faintly. He dropped the knife, clutching his arm, his face contorted in confusion and pain. What the hell? The line spread, branching across his chest, his neck, his face. He started to cough, a dry, hacking sound, and his eyes, usually so full of life, began to glaze over, reflecting the store's garish lights with a disturbing, vacant sheen. Mark collapsed, convulsing violently on the polished floor of Wonderland Toys. Shoppers, finally noticing the commotion, gave us wide berth, their faces a mixture of concern and annoyance. The dark lines under his skin pulsed with an internal, sickly green light, and his body began to contort, his limbs stiffening, his muscles locking into unnatural angles. His skin took on a waxy, doll-like pallor, losing all natural color and texture. His eyes, wide and unblinking, fixed on us, but there was no recognition, only a terrifying emptiness. A faint, mechanical whirring sound emanated from him, growing louder, like gears grinding within his chest. His mouth opened, but it wasn't his voice that came out. It was a distorted, childish giggle, high-pitched and chilling, followed by a whisper that seemed to echo from the very depths of the store, a voice that was everywhere and nowhere. You broke the rule, Mark. Now you are the gift. His body twisted one last time, a final, agonizing spasm, then went rigid. His skin hardened, his clothes seemed to fuse with his form, becoming part of his new, grotesque shell. His features smoothed out, becoming unervingly perfect, like a mannequin's, but with a single dark button eye where his left eye had been. Where Mark had been, there was now a life-sized, one-eyed teddy bear, its fabric a dark, coarse material, its single button eye staring blankly, its other eye socket a gaping, empty hole. The other shoppers, now actively avoiding the scene, continued their festive chatter, their obliviousness a cruel mockery. We stood frozen, staring at the horrifying transformation, the message from the mirror screaming in our minds, 25 days. Pass it on. Or become the gift. The terror was absolute, a cold, suffocating blanket. We somehow managed to drag Mark's thing out of the store, blending into the Christmas Eve chaos, our minds reeling, our hearts pounding a frantic rhythm against our ribs. Back in Liam's apartment, the silence was deafening, broken only by our ragged breaths. We had 25 days. The countdown had begun the moment we left Setealem. Chloe, ever the researcher, her face pale and drawn, frantically searched online for Setealem Corridor, Cursed Toys New York, Christmas Eve toy store legends. Nothing. Just vague urban legends about a toy store that takes a piece of you, or collects lost souls. Maya, clutching her porcelain doll so tightly her knuckles were white, was on the verge of hysterics, her usual bubbly demeanor shattered. Liam, holding his tarnished tin soldier, felt a cold dread seeping into his bones, a fear far deeper than anything he'd ever experienced. The shadows from the corridor, those slithering tendrils of darkness, were no longer confined to the store. They flickered in the corners of Liam's apartment, danced in the reflections of the window, always just out of sight, always watching. The toys themselves began to change. Liam's tin soldier's painted eyes seemed to follow him, its tiny sword vibrating faintly. Maya's doll's cracked lips seemed to widen into a silent, knowing smile, and its missing eye socket felt like a void staring into her soul. Chloe's Jack-in-the-Box occasionally let out a faint, unsettling giggle when no one was near, its clown face seeming to shift in the dim light. The first week was a blur of paranoia, sleepless nights, and desperate, futile attempts. Liam, haunted by Mark's fate, tried to gift his tin soldier to a homeless man, leaving it discreetly on a bench in Central Park. He watched from a distance as the man picked it up, examined it with a weary curiosity, then tossed it into an overflowing trash can. Liam felt a surge of relief, a fleeting hope, but it was short-lived. That night, the tin soldier was back on his bedside table, its uniform slightly dirtier, its tiny sword bent at a sharper angle, its painted eyes seeming to accuse him. The shadows in his apartment grew bolder, coalescing into vague humanoid shapes that would vanish if he turned too quickly, leaving behind a lingering chill. Maya, desperate and terrified, tried to leave her doll at a charity drop-off bin. The next morning, it was sitting on her doorstep, its porcelain face chipped in a new place, a single dark tear-like crack running from its eye. The message was clear. The transfer had to be genuine, a true gift accepted willingly, not a discard. The pressure was immense, a suffocating weight. We were trapped, each with our own ticking time bomb, and the horrifying memory of Mark's transformation into a lifeless toy was a constant, chilling reminder of our fate. As the days dwindled, the toys became more active, more malevolent, their presence growing increasingly oppressive. Liam's tin soldier would march across his desk when he wasn't looking, leaving tiny metallic footprints in the dust, its movements accompanied by a faint, rhythmic clink clink clink. Maya's doll would whisper her name in the dead of night, its voice a dry, papery rustle that seemed to come from just beside her ear, sometimes followed by a soft, mocking sigh. Chloe's Jack-in-the-Box would spring open unexpectedly, its clown face contorted in a silent scream, its spring groaning like an old man's joints. The shadows were everywhere now, no longer just in the periphery, but dancing in the corners of our vision, stretching and shrinking with impossible speed, sometimes even seeming to reach for us. We were losing sleep, losing our minds, our nerves frayed to breaking point. We tried researching ancient curses, folklore, anything that might offer a clue, a loophole. Chloe, her eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep, found a cryptic reference in an old, digitized New York newspaper archive. A series of unexplained disappearances around Wonderland toys every Christmas Eve, dating back a century. Always 25 days before Christmas. Always involving gifts that never stopped giving. The article mentioned a ritual of exchange, but the details were too faded to read, obscured by time and digital decay. We were running out of time, and the toys were becoming extensions of our own growing fear, feeding on it, growing stronger. The mid-story twist hit us hard, a gut punch that redefined our understanding of the horror. Chloe, poring over the faded newspaper article, noticed a crucial detail that had been overlooked in our initial panic. The disappearances always involved people who received a gift from the store, not necessarily those who entered Setealem. The ritual of exchange wasn't about passing the curse, it was about feeding it. The toys weren't just cursed objects, they were vessels collecting something from their temporary owners. And the 25-day limit wasn't a deadline for us to escape, it was a countdown for the toys to fully absorb whatever they needed from us. The shadows, we realized with a sickening lurch, weren't just watching, they were collecting. They were the true guardians of Setealem, ensuring the gifts were properly prepared, ripened for collection. The horrifying truth dawned on us. Mark hadn't just become a toy, he had become a new cursed toy, a fresh vessel for Setealem's endless hunger, a new gift for its collection. The rules weren't for our protection. They were for the curse's perpetuation, a twisted set of instructions to ensure its survival and growth. We were not victims of a random curse. We were participants in a meticulously orchestrated harvest. The pressure building was unbearable, a suffocating weight that crushed our spirits. We were down to 10 days, the calendar a relentless march towards our inevitable transformation. Liam's tin soldier now had a faint, almost imperceptible pulse, a tiny rhythmic beat that mirrored his own frantic heart. Maya's doll's eyes would sometimes glow with a faint internal light, a cold, malevolent gleam that seemed to pierce through her very soul. Chloe's Jack-in-the-Box would hum a discordant tune, a lullaby of madness, its clown face now perpetually grinning, its painted eyes following her every move. The shadows were everywhere now, not just observing. They were actively manipulating our environment, causing objects to fall, doors to creak open and shut, whispering our names from empty rooms, their voices a chorus of distorted children's laughter. We were exhausted, paranoid, and terrified, our bodies aching from lack of sleep, our minds teetering on the brink of madness. The thought of passing the curse to an innocent person was unbearable, a moral dilemma that tore at our consciences, but the alternative, becoming like Mark, was infinitely worse. We started seeing Mark. Not his old self, but the teddy bear sitting silently in the corner of our vision, its single button eye following us, a faint, mechanical giggle sometimes escaping its form. He was a constant, chilling reminder of our fate if we failed, a grotesque monument to our impending doom. The city outside, with its festive lights and carols, felt like a cruel mockery, a celebration of life that we were rapidly losing. The days blurred into a terrifying montage of escalating horror. Liam, desperate, tried to reason with his tin soldier, whispering pleas and threats to the inanimate object, convinced it understood. He started seeing the shadows not just as vague shapes, but as distinct entities, each with its own subtle, predatory movement. One, tall and gaunt, seemed to mimic his posture, its elongated limbs stretching and contracting in sync with his own. Another, small and hunched, would hide under furniture, peeking out with unseen eyes. He began to feel a dull ache in his joints, a stiffness that mimicked the tin soldier's rigid posture. His skin felt strangely cold to the touch, and he found himself standing perfectly still for long periods, lost in thought, his gaze fixed and unblinking. He tried to sleep with the lights on, but the shadows seemed to thrive in the artificial glow, their forms becoming sharper, more defined. The metallic smell from Setealem now seemed to cling to his clothes, his hair, his very skin. Maya's descent was more emotional, more visceral. Her porcelain doll, once a symbol of fragile beauty, became her tormentor. It would appear in unexpected places, on her pillow in her shower, staring at her from the passenger seat of her car. Its whispers grew louder, clearer, sometimes mimicking her own voice, sometimes Mark's distorted giggle. She started having vivid nightmares where the doll would crawl onto her chest, its cracked lips pressing against hers, draining her breath. She developed an intense aversion to reflective surfaces, convinced she saw the doll's reflection instead of her own. Her skin began to feel smooth, cold, and brittle like porcelain. She found herself compulsively touching her face, checking for cracks. The shadows around her apartment would often arrange themselves into a circle, seemingly performing a silent, macabre dance around her, their movements fluid and hypnotic. She tried to smash the doll, but her hands refused to obey, paralyzed by an unseen force. Chloe, the pragmatic one, turned to the only thing she knew: information. She spent every waking moment in libraries, online forums, obscure historical societies, searching for any mention of Setealem, of similar curses, of anything that could offer a solution. Her jack-in-the-box, however, was relentless. It would spring open at random, its clown face contorted in a silent scream, sometimes accompanied by a burst of static that would scramble her computer screen or make the library lights flicker. She started experiencing auditory hallucinations. The faint, discordant music box melody, the distant children's giggles, now seemed to emanate from the walls, from the books, from her own mind. She began to feel a strange internal pressure, as if springs were coiling inside her, ready to burst. Her movements became jerky, almost mechanical, and she found herself twitching uncontrollably. The shadows would often gather around her, their forms coalescing into vague, mocking faces that would leer at her from the corners of her vision, their silent laughter echoing in her ears. With only 5 days left, desperation set in. We gathered at Liam's apartment, a shell of our former selves. Our faces were gaunt, our eyes sunken, reflecting the terror that had consumed us. Mark's teddy bear sat in the corner, a silent, grotesque sentinel, its single button eye seeming to watch our every move. We had tried everything, burying the toys, leaving them in distant cities, even attempting to burn them. The flames recoiled, leaving the toys unharmed. Nothing worked. The toys always returned, more malevolent, more demanding. The shadows were now constant companions, their forms almost solid, their presence a suffocating weight. Chloe, her voice hoarse, finally found a fragment of an old text, a forgotten folktale from Eastern Europe, that spoke of Setealem not as a place, but as an ancient entity, a collector of innocence, that manifested in places of manufactured joy, feeding on the despair of those who sought to escape its gifts. It mentioned a ritual of true exchange, not just passing the toy, but offering a part of oneself willingly to another, a sacrifice of innocence. The text was vague, terrifying, and offered no clear solution. The climax arrived on Christmas Eve, the final day. The city outside was a symphony of carols and laughter, a cruel contrast to our internal hell. We knew we couldn't pass the toys to innocence. The moral weight was too heavy. And we couldn't become like Mark. Chloe, in a moment of frantic insight, reread the faded article about Wonderland toys. "The ritual of exchange happens at the store," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "It's not about giving away the toys. It's about returning them to the source." Liam, his mind a whirlwind of fear and a desperate flicker of hope, agreed. Maya, her porcelain skin now visibly cracking in places, nodded weakly. We went back to Wonderland Toys, the store bustling with last-minute shoppers, their faces alight with festive cheer. The corridor Setealem reappeared, just as before, behind the rocking horses, its sickly green light pulsing invitingly. But this time, the shadows were not just slithering. They were swarming, coalescing into dark, vaguely human shapes that pressed in on us, their forms almost solid, their whispers a cacophony of distorted children's voices. Inside, the shelves were empty, save for a single ornate pedestal at the very end. On it sat a collection of toys, old and new, each with a faint, malevolent glow. And among them, a familiar, one-eyed teddy bear. Mark. We stood before the pedestal, our cursed toys clutched in our hands, their malevolence almost palpable. The shadows pressed closer, their whispers a cacophony of distorted children's voices, now forming coherent, mocking phrases. "Give us your joy, become our plaything, join the collection." The air grew impossibly cold, stinging our lungs. A new message appeared on the cracked mirror, its letters glowing with an intensified sickly green light. "The exchange is due. A gift for a gift. A soul for a soul." It wasn't about giving our toys away, it was about trading them. But for what? And with whom? Suddenly, the teddy bear that was Mark began to stir. Its button eye glowed with a faint, internal light, and its head slowly turned to face us. A distorted, guttural voice, unmistakably Mark's, but twisted by something ancient and cruel, emanated from it. "Join us. Become the joy. It's so warm here." The other toys on the pedestal began to hum, their eyes glowing, their forms subtly shifting, beckoning us. We realized the horrifying truth. Setealem wasn't just a corridor, it was a collector, a sentient entity that fed on human essence, transforming its victims into new gifts, to perpetuate its cycle. It wanted us. All of us. Liam, driven by a desperate surge of adrenaline and a primal need to protect what little humanity remained, made an irreversible choice. He wouldn't let Setealem claim another. He wouldn't let Mark's sacrifice be in vain. He looked at his tin soldier, then at the glowing teddy bear that was Mark, a flicker of defiance in his eyes. "No," he whispered, his voice raw, echoing in the oppressive silence. "No more." He raised his tin soldier, not to offer it, but to smash it against the pedestal, hoping to shatter the cycle. But before he could, a shadow detached itself from the wall, moving with impossible speed, and wrapped itself around his arm, freezing him in place, its icy grip burning his skin. Maya, seeing Liam's struggle, screamed, a sound that was half human, half porcelain crack. Chloe, quick thinking, her mind racing despite the terror, noticed a small ornate key hanging from a chain around the neck of one of the older dolls on the pedestal. It was the only item that didn't glow with malevolence, the only one that felt different, almost warm. It was a key, not a toy. She grabbed it, a desperate gamble, her fingers brushing against the cold, hard porcelain. The shadows shrieked, a sound that tore at our minds, a chorus of infant cries and ancient wails. The immediate consequence of Chloe's action was chaos. The shadows recoiled from the key, hissing like steam, their forms momentarily dissipating. The teddy bear, Mark, let out a mechanical roar, its button eye flashing red. The entire corridor began to shake violently, dust and plaster raining down, the shelves groaning under an unseen weight. The other toys on the pedestal began to vibrate, their malevolent glow intensifying. Chloe, clutching the key, noticed a small, almost invisible keyhole on the side of the pedestal itself, hidden beneath a layer of dust and grime. Without thinking, driven by pure instinct, she inserted the key and turned. A soft, metallic click echoed through the corridor, a sound of finality. The pedestal, with all its cursed toys, began to sink into the floor, swallowed by the darkness, a faint, distorted music box melody accompanying its descent. The shadows, now frantic, lunged at us, their forms solidifying, their clawed hands reaching. Liam, freed from the shadow's grip by the sudden shift, grabbed Maya, whose porcelain skin was now visibly cracking, and we ran, scrambling out of the collapsing corridor as the walls seemed to buckle and twist around us, the very fabric of reality tearing. We burst back into the main store, gasping for air, our lungs burning, the festive jingle of jingle bells, now sounding like a mocking dirge, a soundtrack to our narrow escape. We collapsed on the floor of Wonderland Toys, disoriented and shaking, our bodies aching, our minds reeling. The corridor was gone, replaced by the solid wall of Barbie dolls, their plastic smiles now seeming to mock our terror. The store was still bustling, oblivious to the nightmare we had just endured. We looked at each other, our faces pale, streaked with dust and tears, our hands empty. The cursed toys were gone. Setealem was gone. We had survived. But the silence that followed was not one of relief, but of a profound, unsettling emptiness. We had escaped the physical curse, but the experience had etched itself onto our souls, leaving an indelible mark. We were changed irrevocably. The festive lights of New York now seemed garish, the carols hollow, their cheer a painful reminder of the innocence we had lost. We avoided each other, unable to look at one another without seeing the fear, the trauma, the ghost of Mark, a constant, chilling presence in our collective memory. Liam found himself compulsively checking his reflection, half expecting to see the faint lines of a toy's stitching on his skin. Maya developed an intense phobia of dolls, unable to even look at them without feeling a cold dread, her own skin feeling strangely brittle. Chloe, the most resilient, became withdrawn, spending hours researching ancient curses, a haunted, distant look in her eyes, her movements occasionally jerky, as if a spring was coiling within her. The true horror was the realization that Setealem wasn't just a place, it was a concept. A hunger that had been temporarily sated, but never truly defeated. The key Chloe had used hadn't destroyed Setealem. It had merely reset it, perhaps even released it, allowing it to find new manifestations. The 25-day countdown began anew, not for us to pass on the toys, but for the toys to complete their absorption. And this time there was no escape. We were the original gifts, marked by our encounter, our essence already partially claimed. The toys were now collecting the essence of our fear, our paranoia, our very sanity, slowly transforming us from within. One cold December morning, 25 days after the toys reappeared, Liam woke up to an unnerving silence. He found Maya in her apartment, rigid, her skin smooth and waxy, her eyes wide and unblinking. A porcelain doll now sitting perfectly still on her couch, a single dark crack running from its eye. Chloe was found in her study, her body contorted, her features fixed in a perpetual silent scream, a wooden jack-in-the-box now sitting on her desk, its clown face frozen in a grotesque grin. And Liam felt a familiar tingling under his skin, a stiffness in his joints. He looked down at his hands, seeing the faint, metallic sheen, the subtle hardening of his flesh. He walked to the mirror, his reflection staring back at him, his eyes beginning to glaze over, taking on the vacant, painted look of a tin soldier. The story ends with Liam, now fully transformed into a tin soldier, standing perfectly still in his apartment. The faint, sweet metallic smell of Setealem fills the air. The shadows, now solid and numerous, move around him, arranging other newly transformed gifts, dolls, teddy bears, jack-in-the-boxes, around the room. The apartment is no longer a home, it's a display. A new Setealem. The camera slowly zooms out, showing the festive lights of New York outside, oblivious to the silent, horrifying collection growing within. A faint, distorted jingle of jingle bells plays, mixed with distant, childish giggles. The biggest question remains unanswered. Is Setealem a place, a curse, or a hunger that simply finds new hosts, new corridors, new gifts, every Christmas? And how many others, unknowingly, have become part of its eternal collection?